I need you on November 7th one more time.
Tonight, with just days to go before next Tuesday's election, we take a look at two Black women vying for top political leadership. One as the first mayor of Massachusetts' newest city, and the other as the first African American to represent Boston's 1st District, neither a place with large numbers of voters of color. What does their crossover appeal mean in a state where ethnic and racial enclaves have been the determining factor for political success? Plus, our panel weighs in on Boston's mayoral race between incumbent Marty Walsh and his challenger, City Councilor Tito Jackson. Welcome to our 50th season of Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our live broadcast, and others of you are joining us on Facebook Live. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. Joining me tonight are Kevin Peterson, founder and executive director of the New Democracy Coalition; Ken Cooper, senior editor, WGBH News; Kim McLarin, associate professor of writing, literature, and publishing at Emerson College; and Phillip Martin, senior investigative reporter, WGBH News. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you,
Good to be here.
So we're here in a new kind of political landscape with these two races. First, what do you think about what's happened here and how we got here, that these two women are top vote getters in districts where there are not many voters of color?
Well, I think in the case of Framingham, where Yvonne Spicer finished first in the preliminary election by a lot, one thing that's absent in Framingham, you don't have an entrenched political structure because they never voted for mayor before, which creates some opportunity and running room for a candidate like her. She's lived there a long time. She was a teacher there. She's an executive at a museum, and she sort of conveys an executive personality, and a mayor is an executive. In East Boston and Charlestown and North End, District 1, Lydia Edwards ran once before, did very well. She's rooted in the community. And she's a candidate that seems to have grassroots appeal there. So I'm not surprised that she's doing as well as she is.
I want to say, Kevin, that my first, with regard to Lydia Edwards, I hadn't heard of her. And her candidacy was brought to my attention by a friend of mine who is not a person of color. Mm-hmm. She said, "You really need to pay attention to this Lydia Edwards." I said, "Okay, let me take a look at that race."
Yeah, well, she's a wonderful candidate. First of all, she's ebullient. She's a personality, a political personality unto herself. Lots of high octane, but also very, very smart. So she knows the issues across the city. She's worked in the mayoral administration. She's also been in the trenches for a long time practicing immigration law. So she has a very visceral understanding of immigrants in that part of the city where most immigrants live. Mm-hmm. So I think that her message is resonating because she cares, and people sort of feel that. So I think she's going to do well. If she doesn't win, she is on her way of being a star in this city, one way or another.
So Yvonne Spicer, as Ken noted, was top of the ticket in the primaries. Yeah. I mean, there were 7 candidates, and she came out on top.
That's right. Yvonne is a fireball also. I'm attracted to both of these candidates as women because they've come to these races with a sense of ownership and power and an ability to, a want and an ability to win in what's traditionally known as a man's world in terms of politics in this Commonwealth.
And in Boston politics, too.
Yeah.
Kim.
Yes. Yeah, I'm very excited. I hadn't heard of Lydia Edwards either, and I was very excited. I've seen her on the campaign trail. I think she's dynamic, and of course, I think Ken made a good point about Yvonne. And I think it's very encouraging for, we know the statistics about women in politics and how hard it is for them to run, how hard it is for them to fundraise. They say how challenging, and you have to ask a man once to run, you have to ask a woman 7 times to run. So, you know, and before she can envision taking on that challenge. These two candidates clearly stepped up, especially in Framingham. I mean, right? I mean, and in fact, her outsider status, because even though there's not a political structure, her opponent is has held public office in Framingham. So I think part of this too is voters are looking in a more holistic and better way for a true outsider candidate who they think really does speak to them. So I'm very encouraged to see these two women, because we haven't had, besides, of course, we've had few. I mean, we've got many on the city council, but the fact that they are, especially Lydia, such a young, dynamic star, I think speaks well for the future.
Phillip?
I'm just glad about the issues that are being highlighted by these two candidates. I mean, Lydia's campaign, for example, as Kevin pointed out, the fact that she's an immigration lawyer in a district that's heavily immigrant points out some of the problems that are occurring right now.
We should say the first district is East Boston, Charlestown. I'm missing something.
North End.
North End, that's
yes.
right. That's
Okay,
right.
go
Heavy immigrant communities, particularly East Boston, with its large Latino, Salvadoran, and Central American population, and a lot of people who are voting for the first time. By the way, people who became citizens this past year. The big rush toward citizenship as a result of the Trump candidacy were attributed to the Trump candidacy. So she basically is bringing out this issue, and she's bringing out a lot of these new voters. It's assumed, and we go to Framingham, a city of 70,000 people. WGBH, by the way, has an interesting piece on its website that folks might want to, on our website, that folks might want to take a look at. But here you have in the city of Framingham, a city that's been dealing with real estate problems and the tensions that brought on by high prices and the tensions between South Framingham and North Framingham. She's basically trying to, she's addressing this issue. It's not surprising that one of her main opponent basically has a lot of money at this point coming in from the real estate industry. Much of her money is coming in from mom and pop and from retired individuals and from teachers and people working in the public sector, so on and so forth. And so it's interesting to see these issues being played out in Framingham and the North Framingham and South Framingham. You see the issues of income inequality being highlighted as a result of this candidacy.
Of course, gentrification is also becoming an issue in East Boston, as we're
That's
getting
right.
a lot of pressure as student groups, students, including ours, are moving in there as they're getting priced out. And so I think that's also an issue that Lydia has
And in
addressed.
terms of personality, political personality identification, both of them, I don't mean to sound anachronistic or old-fashioned, but both of them remind me of civil rights leaders, female civil rights leaders from 50 or 60 years ago. Satima Clark, Ella Baker. They come to their issue in terms of being elected. They come to the place that they are with such clarity and with such insight and with such an ability or capacity to make things happen. Those women in the civil rights movement really made things run. The men took all the credit. But here we have a generation of women, these two candidates, who are very clear, who are very, very focused, and who are professionally ready to do the job. And I'm just excited about what they bring to our region.
Yeah. Yvonne Spicer has also gotten money because she's been endorsed by Emily's List, the Democratic women's organizations that support Democratic women who support abortion rights. And both she and Lydia Edwards would have big distinctions if they get elected. Lydia Edwards not only be the first from the East Boston District 1, based District 1.
Where she's lived for 15 years.
Yeah, she would be the first council of color who was not elected from Roxbury or Mattapan.
Really? Wow.
Since 1983, the only councils of colors have been elected from those two districts.
Wow.
And now the city's majority minority, and if the council membership is going to grow, and Kevin knows this, it's going to have to be in the districts. And the map needs to be fair, if you ask me. In the case of Yvonne Spicer, besides being the first mayor of Framingham, which is a distinction enough, she would be the second African-American popularly elected mayor in the whole state.
Wow.
The first being Seti Warren, who's on his way out of office in Newton.
Right.
And that was just a minute ago. He was the first
Yeah,
mayor
right,
elected.
exactly.
So it wasn't like that was 50 years ago.
That's right.
You know? Yeah. I mean, it's all right. Let's talk about. You hinted at it, Phillip. Demographic shifts. So both of their communities are still largely not persons of color as voters, but there have been some demographic shifts to note. Which do you note, Kevin? That makes significance.
In District 1, for decades, the bastion of Italian politics in this city, up until I think John Nucci, there were Italian sort of listing back into the 18th century in that particular area. It is a new district now, not necessarily because it's been redistricting, but because there have been an influx of new people sort of populating those areas, and an outflux of traditional Italian families, particularly in the North End and East Boston. So it's an entirely new political, electoral, cultural landscape, and Lydia, to her credit, is taking advantage of the opportunity to give voice to that new community.
I mean, but the pattern you see across the city is that the demographic numbers change, but political representation lags behind because the entrenched structures hold on to those seats. And they actually have, had the experience of being organized and motivated and mobilized and understand the stakes of elections. So it takes time for the numbers to catch up to the political representation.
But it's not only just the physical presence of new people coming into it. What that also means from a demographic shift is that there are lots of people that maybe don't respond to that. They don't know the people who've been entrenched. They just got here. And so if you're going to represent me, who are you? What are you talking about? Here are my issues. How are you responding?
Right, which is why both these candidates, part of the reason I think both these candidates are doing so well is that they're running incredible ground campaigns, right? They are knocking on doors. They are meeting people. They are putting in the shoe leather. And that may be true. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the other demographic changes is the pressure on East Boston from a lot of student population who are being priced out. The students from Suffolk and Emerson, I know this, Emerson actually just had an article in their paper today about this happening. So many students are pushing into that area. And, well, I don't know if they're going to vote or not in local elections. They don't tend to vote in local elections. But I think these candidates are doing well in part because of that ground campaign that they're running.
Well, another interesting aspect of both of their campaigns is they're sowing the seeds of unity that we haven't always seen in Boston, for example. As Kevin pointed out, the North End, for example, traditionally Italo-American neighborhood had relied on Italo-American votes for a long time. But what we see with both Lydia and we see with Yvonne are efforts to basically sow the demographic sectors of the pieces together.
Don't forget Charlestown.
And Charlestown, that's right. And so when you look at a place like Framingham, for example, with its large Brazilian population, Brazilians have often been felt left out of the equation in the politics of Framingham. And you see a purposeful effort on the part of both candidates in Framingham reaching out to the Brazilian community. Yvonne has in fact made major, I would say, major efforts to basically sow in those demographics, because you also find a Salvadoran population there. You find other, let's face it, Framingham is a mosaic, this incredible mosaic of cultures.
It's the most ethnically diverse community.
That's right. It's extraordinarily diverse. And she, again, way before the mayoral campaign began, she's been working on this for years in various ways in her other capacity, working in the public sector. And the same thing is certainly true for Lydia, the need to basically to reach out to a community that's facing extraordinary anxiety over the notion of the end of TPS, for example, which is the temporary protective status for Salvadorans and Hondurans and Guatemalans in that community. This is an issue. It's a national issue, but it's also a local issue for her. So she's basically been reaching out to those communities, the voting sectors of that community, to basically reassure them that she will be their voice on the city council.
So, Ken, how do you take some of the efforts from the opponents to rebrand themselves as the people who've always been here? Like we're the foundational. It's a long line of traditionalists, and we've been here. You know who we are, and So I'm asking for your vote based on that tradition.
What a novel tactic in Boston.
Or America.
I'm born here. I mean, it's sort of reflex. And some people might think if that's all you got to say, then, I mean, a lot of people were born here. They're not all running for council or mayor. But, it has its appeal to certain parts of the population. But if you really think about it and you're a thoughtful voter, you got to go beyond where you were born and how long you lived somewhere. I mean, what are you going to do and how do you see this issue and that issue? So it goes so far, only so far, I think. It doesn't necessarily win a race for you.
Well, I'm just reminded of being surprised when I learned what OFD meant. So there's a different, originally from Dorchester, that has meaning in a political context.
So true, yeah.
And so people were saying, yeah, he's OFD. What does that mean? I say, and they tell me. So it's not as entrenched in these communities as that, but that had some meaning, and that's what I'm trying to get to. So
It had meaning.
Yeah.
I think Ken is right. I think you have I mean, the demographics have shifted so dramatically, and it might have worked. It worked, as we know, parochially to an extraordinary degree in the 70s and 80s during the whole busing period. The whole notion to appeal to born in this community, that was those were code words. And they remain code words in many ways. But again, with the demographic shift, absolutely not as powerful as
It's
it once
a form
was.
of political and cultural recalcitrance,
Yeah.
really, which needs to be overcome. And I think part of the work of candidates within the context of democracy, city council races or state rep races, as these districts, these areas are changing, it's the work of these candidates to convince these evolving districts or the people within these districts to understand that there's a new day and try to blend the old with the new, or the new as the old sort of recedes. That's always, I always thought that, what is it, ODF?
OFD. Originally from Dorchester.
I've heard it, but I've always rejected it as something that was parochial and narrow-minded, and something that just needed to go.
I think you also have to be careful right now. I mean, it's certainly, even Dorchester is changing, but something like that could have unwelcome echoes of the national situation now, which would probably, I hope, not play well in Boston, right? If that appeal to nativism is seen to be echoing the "Make America Great Again" thing, right?
Yeah, it's not limited to white candidates. We got two candidates in District 7, city council race. One talks about her family being in Roxbury in Boston for 100 years. Another one talks about how his family's been in, he was born here.
But that is a New
one
England
has a
thing.
racial, one has a racial context, and the other has a more legacy context, which is something.
It's the same. The nature of the pill is the same.
The nature of the pill, I tend to
But the
agree.
results are.
I'm a homeboy. I'm a homegirl. That's what they say.
Right.
Yeah, but the results are different, though. Being a homeboy or homegirl in Savin Hill, if you were that type of person in the 1960s or the 70s, it's a more potentially insidious thing to be if you're a black person.
As a resident of this town who actually lives in Dorchester,
Exactly.
I can tell you that our current mayor got a lot of credit in the part of the neighborhood I live, because not only does he live nearby, he used to play here when he was a kid. He used to hang out here.
He doesn't live in Savin Hill anymore.
I know it, but I don't live in Savin Hill, but the neighborhood I live is not far away, and people voted for him because they knew him since he was a young man. He used to hang out in the neighborhood, so it doesn't necessarily reject others. But
but I think what Kevin is saying is that the way it's been interpreted in some places in Boston, because there are very much some serious ethnic enclaves and some racial enclaves in town, that can have another meaning, which brings me to this question, which is, what is the meaning of thinking about these two candidates at this time? And as much as we hope Boston goes in a different direction, we know Boston is fraught with a lot of racial issues. And so Boston and Greater Boston are now considering candidates at this time that are blowing through some of that. It's kind of mind-boggling.
They are blowing through it. I mean, shootings are up. If you're shot in Boston, you're most likely to be black or live in a black or Latino neighborhood. The income inequality is tracked along a racial divide. You look at the net worth of a white family, Federal Reserve study, $285,000. Compare that to the net worth of a black family, $8. I think Latino, $0. So there is this incredible manifestation of race. We see Fenway Park. You see my challenge around Faneuil Hall. I asked the mayor about changing the Faneuil Hall. He says he doesn't want to have the conversation. Yet, at the beginning of his administration, he says, we are ripe for a conversation around race. Well, how do you say that at the beginning of your administration 3 years ago? And you're challenged by some, well-minded people and you say you don't want to have the conversation.
Not until after the election. Come on.
There's a problem here, it's
Yet
unfortunate that
he's engaged in that conversation. I mean, you have
peripherally.
Yeah, no, but
not
you
substantially.
Well, I'm not sure how you measure that,
Substantively.
and I'll tell you why. Because when you think of the various efforts that have gone on, including at the Emerson Majestic Theater last year, where conversation did begin.
You know what? Y'all are moving off.
Yeah,
We're gonna get to that a little bit later. Let me pause that for a minute because I was getting really interested, and I realized no, we're talking about that later. I want to stay on my point, which is. What is the meaning now of these two candidates, that's Lydia Edwards and Yvonne Spicer, in communities, whether or not there is a physical demographic shift that the general greater Boston community has been fraught with some issues?
I think Kevin's point is that we don't want to overstate it, is that the meaning, is that it's exciting and it's encouraging, but I don't think it signals, I think we want to be careful about suggesting this signals some kind of racial sea change in Boston. I mean, we've had Seti Warren in Newton, right? I mean, so we've had sporadic moments of leverage before. Has that transcended into real, meaningful, substantial change? No, it hasn't. So as exciting as it is, I don't think it's I don't think we want to overstate it.
I tend to agree with that. I don't think we want to overstate it, but I also think that what we see here, the other thing that's being emphasized here, importantly, is class chasm that exists in Boston, and that is. That's a huge issue. One reason Lydia Edwards is attracting support is not, again, based simply on a color variable, but also on the class issues that she's articulated. The need, there's a major focus on affordable housing. Now, that's easier said than done. We know, for example, that the mayor has this plan to increase affordable housing by 2030, a certain number of units by 2030. And you have other people saying you've got to really speed that up. Lydia Edwards is among those who are saying that, it's urgent that we basically talk about affordable housing in a way that's going to basically accelerate this possibility. And accelerating that possibility means that you basically have to, for example, increase the percentage of linkage that developers are required to buy into right now. You hear both Lydia Edwards saying this, you hear Tito Jackson saying this, and many people believe that, well, that's absolutely correct. In order to accelerate the amount of necessary affordable housing where we see people being displaced every day in Roxbury, Dorchester, Chinatown, Charlestown, all over the city, that in order to meet those goals, you're going to have to do something that's very, very radical.
I'm actually going to dissent a little bit from your point, Phillip. I'm not so sure that in certain parts of the city, the issue is a lack of affordable housing as opposed to a lack of adequate income. In Roxbury, anywhere between 45 and 70% of housing units, depending on which standard you use, are already affordable. What's lacking in places like Roxbury is adequate income, access to good jobs. I don't want to quote a former presidential candidate at good wages. Hear me, Michael Dukakis. But that's what's needed. And
those things are concomitant.
Well, it's
it's a class issue, though, to his original point.
Yeah, it is. I mean, do we want Roxbury to be like 90% affordable housing? I mean, what are the downsides of that?
That's a good point.
I mean, and how do we build wealth if this African American community
is
subsidized? It's all subsidized housing. There's not enough home ownership to build wealth. So I think there's a balance to be made, and I would like to see more advocacy for greater access to the best jobs in this city, in finance, in the tech fields, and for those, and for the mayor, whoever it is, to hold the captains of those industries accountable. You invite G here, you want Amazon here, you here. Is there a conversation? Yeah, I want you in my city, but you got to take care of my folks and not just the light ones.
Right.
My folks of color. I want, and not just at the bottom of the ladder.
Right.
That's
a good point.
Well, if Lydia Edwards is elected, within 10 years, as David Bernstein, who's WGBH's political analyst, has noted, the change on the city council is monumental in terms of who's there now. Michelle Wu is there, Anissa Esaibi George, Ayanna Presley. There was one woman, as he pointed out, 10 years ago was Maureen Feeney, and so this is wholesale change. She would, be added to this, and that begins to reflect a majority-minority city on that body anyway.
Well, Lisa, actually, certain women candidates look good on Tuesday, it would be like 6 out of 13 could be
Yeah.
women on the city council.
That's pretty amazing. And then, of course, as we've noted, it's all new for Yvonne Spicer. and her
But
community.
the flip
Yeah.
side is, as I've talked to brothers in the neighborhood, if all women win, particularly in the districts, there will be no African American males on the city council. That hasn't been. I don't know if that's good or bad.
That's interesting.
But that's,
I think everybody has their time. Everybody has their time.
We're not going to get into
Well,
it.
we talk about diversity all the time, so
Yeah.
this is an issue.
Well, the
It
brothers
is,
need to run better
All the
campaigns.
men, what's the famous anthology, all the men are black, all the women are white, and some of us are brave. Like, why y'all can't support us? I mean, come on now.
I'm just saying that I picked this up.
All right, we're going to pause this right now because that's the end of our show. Thanks to all of our guests, and thank you for joining us. But you can stay with us right now as we continue this conversation about the upcoming election online at Facebook Live.